What is up, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and today I will be bringing you our early top 10 wide receivers to draft in 2022 fantasy football. If you do enjoy today's content, go ahead and smash that like button and consider subscribing down below and joining the Catch fam. And of course, let me know who is your number one receiver going into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, let's break down our top 10 early rankings. Number one on the list, I don't think it matters wherever you go, is going to be Cooper Kupp. Just an astronomical fantasy football season we saw out of Cooper Kupp, the second most receiving yards of all time in NFL history. Even if he had an extra game or two extra games, however you look at it, right? Cooper Kupp had a phenomenal season. There's no way that he slides out of the top six, in my opinion. This is the first time in a couple years where we really have a bona fide wide receiver being picked in the top six. A lot of the past years, it's been closer to that 8 or 9, maybe the 7 mark in some leagues. But overall, Cooper Kupp is going to be tied right into those top 5 or so running backs. You're going to see leagues where this guy goes number 4 or number 5. Not really a lot of explanation needed here. We know Kupp is the number one receiver going into 2022. Now, you could have some debate with the next couple guys coming up if some of them are worthy going over Cooper Kupp, but I just think when it comes time to break down the rankings next year, everyone everywhere is going to have Kupp number 1. Now, obviously, I think Devonta Adams naturally comes in at number 2. Another stud performance, amazing season for Devonta Adams. 123 receptions, over 1,500 receiving yards, and double-digit touchdowns at 11 touchdowns on the season. The big question mark about Devonta Adams is who is the quarterback throwing him the football next year. If it's Aaron Rodgers, you could argue that Adams becomes a number one receiver over Kupp, just because on a consistency scale, we know what to expect with Adams, and we could see some natural regression out of Cooper Kupp going into next year. Nonetheless, whether Rodgers is a quarterback for Adams or not, we know the pure talent involved. We know the production that he gives us year after year. And Adams kind of neck and neck for me with Kupp if we bring that consistency scale into factor as well. But overall, I think in most drafts next year, he'll fall into that number 2 receiver spot. Next up on the list, I've got Justin Jefferson, because he's been so incredibly consistent. Really, when you look at the numbers that he had on the season, he was completely underrated. You really didn't hear a lot of individuals talking about him towards the end of the season, but he had over 1,600 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, and 110 receptions. He had a monster sophomore season. I think he is undoubtedly your receiver number 3. You could argue maybe a JaMarr Chase for his explosive play, as well as a Tyreek Hill for that huge upside. Kind of in the same category, near the number 3 mark. We'll talk about both of those guys very shortly. But listen, I think Jefferson was completely underrated. He absolutely deserves to be the head of this next tier right after Cooper Kupp and Devonta Adams. Going into the same tier here, we've got JaMarr Chase, right? I'm putting JaMarr Chase before Tyreek Hill, mainly due to youth and due to the factors of Tyreek Hill's overall injuries, right? So I'll take JaMarr Chase here. I think similar to Justin Jefferson, who had a phenomenal rookie season, similar to JaMarr Chase's phenomenal rookie season, I think Chase progresses in his sophomore campaign. You might see some natural regression from some of these insanely monster games, like his week 17 performance where he put up 50 freaking fantasy points. Nonetheless, I like Chase a whole lot next year. I think that relationship with Joe Burrow, that chemistry, it's not going anywhere. That offense is going to continue to perform at a high level. And at the least, Burrow and Chase isn't going anywhere. I love him as wide receiver number 4 going into 2022. Next up on the list, I've got Tyreek Hill. Still makes the top 5 for me. Listen, I know he had a relatively disappointing fantasy season overall. Some injuries, a lot of inconsistency, but he still at times showed us why he's Tyreek Hill. And we can't ignore that huge big play capability that Hill offers, right? We can't ignore Mahomes to Hill even if we saw it kind of get shut down at times this year. So I think Hill still makes the top 5. I think you could argue maybe in some leagues he moves down to 6 or 7, but I'll keep him at number 5 just because we know what the man can do, right? Next on the list, I've got Stefon Diggs, a player who continues to be extremely consistent. 103 receptions on the year and over 1,200 receiving yards. A phenomenal year in and year out. And listen, talking about QB to receiver chemistry, Allen and Diggs, similar to Burrow and Chase, I don't think this is going anywhere anytime soon. These two have a phenomenal connection. I think that continues well into 2022. So once again, a great consistent play out of Stefon Diggs in 2021. I don't think that's going anywhere in 2022. Next up on the list, I've got Deebo Samuel, who I think we have a little bit of a question mark around. Obviously, I think we'll see some natural regression for Deebo Samuel, who really came onto the scene this past year, came in as wide receiver 3 on average in most fantasy leagues. I mean, he just had a monster season, 1,400 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, while rushing 59 times for 365 yards and 8 touchdowns. I mean, just a phenomenal season. Banged up at times, banged up last year as well. So you really got to give props to Deebo Samuel. What he did under this offense was absolutely phenomenal. And you could argue that he's kind of a steal where I've got him ranked here. And you could also argue that in a lot of leagues, he'll probably go a little bit sooner, right? I mean, I won't be surprised if he gets drafted before guys like Stefon Diggs and Tyreek Hill. He had such an explosive, unique year that I really won't be surprised if he goes before some of those superstar type guys. But I do think naturally we see a little bit of regression for Deebo Samuel next year, but that's not a knock at all. I think he's going to have a phenomenal season in 2022, and I'm not going to be mad if you draft him ahead of some of these players that we had listed in front of him. Next up on the list, I have got CeeDee Lamb. Listen, I think you could argue in some leagues Lamb falls a little bit more because he really, towards the end of the season, kind of fell off. He started to have not some of these games that came up in high fashion, but aside of that, he had some inconsistency, especially in the middle of the season. Overall, he still finished as a top 15 receiver, but I think next year we see Amari Cooper really, start to take hold of that veteran stage of his career, which he's already kind of started to do. We've seen that with injuries and such, but also Michael Gallup is set to become a free agent next year. So I really think that a lot of volume goes up for CeeDee Lamb. I also think you could argue that Ezekiel Elliott starts to become less of a factor for this team, although, if Tony Pollard takes up some of those snaps, I mean, it's hard to say. I still like Zeke next year, but I won't be surprised if the Cowboys start to throw the football a little bit more next year. It's really hard to say. Overall, I like CeeDee Lamb. I think there's a little bit of disappointment with what we saw out of him this past year. We really thought he could have been a top 10, top 8 receiver in 2021. Nonetheless, I think there's a lot of reasons to have faith in him in 2022. I think if you can get him at the end of the 2nd round next year, beginning of the 3rd round, if you can get him through the end of the 3rd round or the 4th round, that's an absolute steal. I think he's going to have a very productive year overall in 2022. Next up on the list, I've got Mike Evans. You could argue Chris Godwin in this spot as well. I really don't mind either way, right? If Godwin was healthy throughout the whole season, him and Mike Evans would have easily both been probably top 12 receivers, okay? Evans on average coming in as receiver 12. Listen, as long as Brady is there, I want the number 1 receiver. The question mark right now, is Godwin going to be a Buccaneer next year? He is set to become a free agent. Very likely he gets re-signed. I think if Godwin gets re-signed, you go with Godwin over Evans. They both have had plenty of injury issues, but Evans a little bit older and has consistently, almost every season as of late, dealt with injury issues. So it depends here, right? This is kind of an asterisk. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, whoever you pick, I don't have any beef with. I'm going to put Mike Evans for now, just in case Godwin becomes a free agent. Both receivers had very, very productive years. Buccaneers offense in terms of their passing game was very, very productive. Actually, it was productive overall when we look at what Fournette was able to do on the season. So I'll put Evans here, but like I said, a little bit of an asterisk. Last on the list, this one was kind of tough to decide, but I'm actually going to put Keenan Allen. Now, when we go back and look at the top players for the year, there's a lot of players we could got put in this spot, right? Deontay Johnson is one, but I've got kind of a question mark because Big Ben is probably going to retire, probably not going to be a Steeler if he does not retire. So I don't know who's throwing Deontay Johnson the rock. I don't know what that offense looks like. Mike Williams, far too boomer bust for me. Not putting him in the top 10 at all. Hunter Renfrow, I think, is a phenomenal option, a big steal next year. We'll see where he comes into the rankings heading into 2022, but he's going to be a great fantasy player in 2022. I really like me some Hunter Renfrow. Metcalf and Lockett, I think Metcalf maybe the more favorable receiver going 2022, but Russell Wilson's probably off that team. Don't know who's throwing them the rock, so they don't make the top 10 for me. Then you got plenty of other players. I mean, Michael Pittman, once again, we don't know. Carson Wentz is throwing in the football or not. Jalen Waddle, great player. Don't know if Tua is going to be there. He probably will. I really do like Waddle next year. There's plenty of other good receivers we could continue to break down, but the reason I'm picking Keenan Allen at the end of the day and not Mike Williams, not Johnson, Metcalf, or Renfrow is mainly because we know that Justin Herbert is the quarterback for the Chargers, and we know the way that Justin Herbert plays, and we know that that connection is going nowhere. So I'll take the consistency that I expect out of Keenan Allen, who had a phenomenal season. 130 receptions, over 1,100 receiving yards. He had a great season, especially in full PPR. So I'll take Allen as my number 10 receiver going into 2022. And that'll top off the video, man. Make sure you guys hit that like button if you enjoyed today's content. Make sure if you're new to the channel, you do subscribe down below and join the Catch family on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And please let me know in the comments what you think about my top 10 rankings, my top 10 early rankings for the wide receiver position going into 2022. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.